My name is Judith Coppell, and I was a passenger on the SS St. Louis. I was only 14 months old. I was born in Germany in 1938, and I was in Berlin when they had the Kristallnacht, or the night of falling glass. You see, when the ship landed, my family and I, this was my mother, my father, my grandfather, and myself, chose to go to France because it was not occupied yet by the Nazis. And I felt safe, and I was a happy little child until one morning there was a knock on our door, and it was the French police. And why were they there? They were there because we were Jewish. They arrested us, my mother, my father, and myself. And they took us to a camp. It was a determined camp, I believe. The name of it was Gurs in the southern part of France. One evening, my father came in and whispered something to my mother. Oh, my mother had been playing with me, and she looked so sad all of a sudden. And she said, Judith, I have to tell you that Mommy and Daddy have to go away, but I want you to be a good girl. And after that, my father came in and he said, Judy, let's go for a walk. And my mother gave me a kiss on the cheek. Bye-bye. And so we walked in the darkness somewhere. And all of a sudden, there was an office or a house. It was the headquarters of the OSE, who were trying to take out as many children as possible. And there I was, holding my father's hand. And he said, look over there, Judy, look over there. There was something that was interesting to a 4-year-old child. And here I'm holding his hand, and I looked at whatever object it was, and I heard my father saying, Judy, just a minute. He let go of my hand, and when I turned around, my hand was taken up again by someone else. I never saw my father or mother again. They were taken on a train to Auschwitz, and they were put to death. All my life, I had the feeling that I was going to be abandoned. When I went back to, they took me back to my home where the landlord took care of me, and they became my mother and father. And they loved me, and I was so happy. But every once in a while, I would say, when are my mommy and daddy coming back? There was no answer. I felt that I was going to lose even my French family, which I did in 1946 when the war was over. I was put on a ship, the Atos II. We sailed from Marseille to America. I didn't want to go. I remember my French mom taking me to the office of the OSE in Paris, and she was holding onto my hand. I was holding onto hers, and she had to let go of my hand. And I was begging, please, please, Maman, please don't abandon me. That was the second abandonment. We sailed on the ship to the United States, and I met my aunt and uncle for the first time. As I grew up in America, I wasn't allowed to speak any more French. I wasn't allowed to sing any more French songs. It was forbidden. I wrote to Maman, and the letters were torn up because I had to cut off any ties that I had with them. And the way I grew up, I was always depressed. I was always frightened. There was a lot of fear in me. I decided to go back to France after 46 years. I saw my French mom for the first time in 46 years. She was living a very modest life, no hot water, and walk up. She was a very brave lady during the war. She risked her life for me so that I could live. But she was so sad. I'll never forget the look in her eyes. I decided to have her honored by Yad Vashem. That's the Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem. So 2 years in a row, I was able to go to France after 46 years.
Why weren't you allowed to speak or sing French songs anymore? And why did you have to like cut off the landlord and his wife?
I don't know. All I know is that I was very sad that I was taken, that France was completely cut off from me because I love being in France.
I am French myself. I have a French family. I was born there. And it's wonderful to hear this story. And I mean, I can't, if it wasn't something, it's something, if you ask any of my friends, that I talk about a lot. And I just wanted to say that it's so horrible to hear from you that you weren't able to celebrate any of that culture, any of that heritage. But that I just wanted to thank you.
I wanted to become Catholic. I went to school with them, and I went to church, celebrated all the holidays. It was wonderful.
So
I became an interfaith minister, by the way.
Oh, wow.
Later, yes.
What made you decide to go back to France after how, I don't remember how long you said, but like 40-something years?
I went to a conference for hidden children, and I remember at a luncheon there were 22 people on the stage, and they were saviors. They were people that had saved Jews during the war. And I cried and I cried and I said, Maman should be there. I used to call her Maman. She should be there among the 22 people. And I decided I would call her up. I had her telephone number from her granddaughter. So I called her up in France, and with a very broken French, I said, Maman, thank you for saving my life, and I want to see you. Can I come and see you? And she didn't speak English, so she said, Mais oui, ma chérie, viens. But yes, my darling, come to France. And two months later, I was on an Air France going first to Paris and then to Pau, where she lived.
Not after the war, after you were able to go to France, what was the political atmosphere there?
I found a lot of love from the people that I was there, that in the town, and it was wonderful for me to just be with Maman. And I asked to go to Lourdes, which was a Christian city, and they had healing water, and I drank some of the water there. As I said, I'm an interfaith minister at this time, and I think we're all one, and this is what I try to tell whoever, listens to me.
I had the privilege last year of attending an honor for Captain Gustav Schröder. The passengers of the St. Louis found out that he had lived in poverty the entire war and was extremely poor. They collected funds to sustain him for the rest of his life. I remember my parents taking up a collection from anyone they knew, and I had the honor of honoring him as well when I was in Jerusalem last year.
Wow.
Like, when did you figure out what happened to you on the St. Louis?
And it wasn't until 1989 when we had our first reunion when it really hit me. And we boarded a ship which represented the St. Louis, and I couldn't stop crying for the whole voyage. It was as though my spirit was remembering. I didn't remember consciously. And that's when I started, being very, very much part of the St. Louis passengers. I was called the baby.
I was wondering, when you reunited with your French mother or met her family, were you able to ask her what made her accept you and save you as a small child? Why was
said
she
it
an
was the
upstander?
Christian thing to do.
Yeah.
It was the thing for her to do. She risked her life and the whole family's life if I would have been found out, you know. The Nazis did come to our house, and I remember her putting my hair on top of my ears because she was afraid that they would know I was Jewish. Yeah, and also she said, "Don't speak," because I had a German accent. And one of the soldiers said to me afterwards, "You are such a pretty girl. You look like your mommy." And I went over to Mama, and I told her, you know, and I said to her, "You see, Mama, you're really my mother now."
If your grandchildren were here today with these students, what message would you like to leave with them as far as the lessons that they've learned and what's going on in the world today?
Well, I want them to remember me, their Nana. I want them to know my story and let them tell my story to their friends or their classmates and so on. We have to remember. Somebody said remembrance is the secret of redemption. So I would tell them, we have to remember the past. And you see, I was there, and what happened to me was the truth. And just know that, and especially on the bar and bat mitzvah, I have twin grandchildren. I would tell them to remember that I was part of the Holocaust also. So were my parents, so were their great-grandchildren.
Okay, thank you. Let's show our appreciation.
Thank you so much.
You lived in DP camp for how long?
10 years.
From what years to what years?
45 to 55.
So where were you born?
I was born in Poland, in White Russia. My family were part of the partisans, which are very famous at this point, the Bielski brothers.
Mm-hmm.
So my family started the Bielski brothers partisans. What they did is the Germans came in and they started hiding in the forest. So it was my family, the Chincholskis, and then some of the Bielskis joined them. Mm-hmm. And before you know it, the brothers, the Bielski brothers, they were very heroic guys. They were really like, and they took over, and there was like an influx of a lot of people. We had about 1,200 people in a camp in the forest, moving from one place to another, escaping the Germans. I was just born around that time, so I was hidden by a Polish family. I was taught to hate Jews. I called my grandfather, when I got back to the camp, I called my grandfather Stary Osmalony Żyd, which means an old burned up Jew, I used to call my grandfather. So it was like, you know, because where I was hidden, there was a police station right like about, what should I say, 20 feet away. And so they, you know, I was supposedly a child from a family from a different town. So they had to instill it to me as a young child. What did I know, right? So I was really
So
kind of,
that's why you were told to hate Jews,
right?
to protect yourself.
Exactly. Because they taught me if you see a Jew, he's a starios malone Žid.
Which is what?
Which is an old burned up Jew, you know, like, so my grandfather.
So who was telling you this?
My babcha, I didn't call her mother, I called her babcha, the family that kept me.
They were Jewish?
No,
They were not
Polish.
Jewish.
They were Polish.
But they knew you were.
Yeah, they kept me, yes. You know, when I got to them, they kept me in a pit. Like they used to have in those villages like potato pits where they used to keep potatoes for over winter.
Right.
So that's where they kept me. It was a little baby.
So you weren't with your parents or your family?
No, not for a while.
And then were you reunited with them?
Right, just before the war ended, I was reunited with them, yes.
Now, you went back to Poland at one time, is that right?
Yeah, we went back about 25 years ago. It was like a...
What was that like? You go back to the town where you...
I'll tell you what it was like. We were a group of 16 family members, like from Israel, from the United States. Where else did we have family that came to that? And Canada, I think. And it was a time when some monuments were erected for the mass graves in the town where I was born. And so we went for that actually, and of course we went to see where we were, where we came from. So it was like a very moving trip because we went back to the place where I was hidden. I had a cousin who also had a similar story to the place where she was hidden. She was on the trip with us. And we went back to the forest where all of the partisans were hidden, you know, we were moving around. And so it was a very moving trip. I found a place where I was hidden. I found a pit where I was hidden as a little kid, you know. And it was very moving. At that point, I found out that the people that kept me, after the cute little girl was picked up by a bunch of partisans, they killed the family. So that was very hard.
Starting with the invasion of Poland in 1940, Germany embarked on a mass extermination project that would result in the elimination of more than 6 million European Jews. It was decided to cram as many men, women, and children into cattle or railroad boxcars. Typically, as many as 150 people were forced to stand inside these coffin-like vehicles for days without food, water, or ventilation. Many died before arriving at their final destinations. Several years ago, the Holocaust Memorial Center embarked on a project to acquire and restore one of these boxcars. In 2011, the center received delivery of an over 100-year-old German-built boxcar to be included in its permanent display. During 2012, construction of the Henrietta and Alvin Weisberg Gallery was begun. Once finished, the boxcar will be the main focal point of this new exhibit. It will help explain what millions experienced on their way to their final days of life. On September 24th, in front of hundreds of supporters and a handful of Holocaust survivors, the boxcar was moved from its temporary location to its new permanent home.
Yes, I'm one of the child survivor of the Holocaust, and believe me that this boxcar reminds me of lots of things. And the first time I went in one of those was with my mother. We were on our way to a labor camp, and we were probably maybe 100 of us in there. It was just packed like sardines. But on top of that, what the German did, it wasn't good enough to actually suffer that much. They put some saltpeter. Saltpeter is a phosphate that they use to make gunpowder and other fertilizer, things like that. And when saltpeter is in contact with liquid, it emanates some fumes. It makes you sick. It makes your eyes water. It makes you vomit. So you can imagine with kids and older people, what happened is that when we urinate, of course you have to go. So then they made people sick. And when we arrived in Drancy, they actually dragged, probably, I didn't count, I was too small, I was about 9.5 years old. They probably dragged maybe 10 or 15 bodies that couldn't take it anymore. Died. It was awful, awful. So that boxcar, yeah.
We were packed into the boxcar.
How long were you in the boxcar?
For 2 days,
How many people on the boxcar?
approximately between 120 to 150
And where did the boxcar end up? Where did it stop?
in Birkenau.
Travel in the boxcar with any family?
With my mother, sister, and uncle.
Did any of them survive the Holocaust?
Just my uncle.
When you see the boxcar, what does it mean to you?
Well, it's not pleasant memories.
We're going to come to visit the boxcar when it's inside the museum.
He doesn't do it.
Well,
How is it going to make you feel?
Happy New Year, both of you.
It's a permanent home, a permanent memory.
How are you? I'm very excited.
well said. It's permanent. Absolutely.
Myself a partner there who wore a Gestapo uniform. His name was Ludwig Cronenberg, and we were crawling in under the barbed wire into the ghetto, which took us a good night, the whole night to get there. And we were able to get out a few people out of the ghetto in Lodz and bring them to Warsaw. But after a very short time, one of our members proved to be a traitor. He was a Gestapo informant, and we were all arrested. And Ludwig Cronenberg, my partner, was executed, and my paper somehow held up to the scrutiny, and I was sentenced to 9 months imprisonment for sympathizing with Jews as a German. They still didn't discover I was Jewish. I was sentenced to 9 months in prison for sympathizing with Jews. I spent the first 3 months I was in panic because I didn't know exactly what they wanted with me. They came to my apartment, to my room, to arrest me. I thought that they knew I was Jewish. Yet when they brought me to prison, they put me in the German cell. And I just didn't know exactly what to think about it. But once my case came up in court, I found out that I was arrested for sympathizing with Jews. They sent me then to another prison, and after 9 months, they let me go. Because I was a German, I completed my sentence, out I went. When I came out, I discovered that my parents didn't want to go into the ghetto, so they left Lodz when the ghetto was established, and they went to the city called Tomaszów Mazowiecki, where my grandfather was the cantor of the city, where my two aunts were teachers. We had friends, we had relatives. This was our town. So this is where I went to join my parents. I was swollen of starvation. I had a skin problem after the prison. It was a horror. And my parents got me back on my feet. And they thought that they escaped the ghetto, but it didn't take very long before the ghetto in Tomaszów was also made a ghetto. In every city in Poland they made ghettos. And the small villages and towns surrounding the towns had to move in, the Jewish population had to move in. We had to absorb them, and it became a very, very sad situation. First of all, what do you call it? In this tight containment, there's epidemics, and everything spread. And we had to work for the Germans in workshops, but we were not paid for our work. We were given food rations that were not sufficient. In order to survive, we had to sell our possessions, and in order to do that, we had to go under the barbed wire to the outside, to the local population for some potatoes or some bread. And epidemics spread and starvation spread, and people were dying like flies. And we had no luxury of funerals. When somebody died, the dead body was put out on the sidewalk. Young men with boxes were pulling them on wheels, and they were picking up the dead bodies for mass burial in the cemetery. Now, we wanted the ghetto to function because our parents survived World War I, and they said that war is hell, but it ends. And when it ends, you go back home. So this is what we were hoping. The war will end, and we'll go back home to our life as we knew it. So in order to survive the ghetto, we needed to function. Schools were forbidden for Jewish children. So we had illegal schools in the ghetto. I had a school in my house, a few children. And my cousins, some other girls, mostly girls did that because somehow girls took over. Girls were stronger than men. Also, girls could pass easier. Boys, Jewish boys, were the only people that were circumcised in Europe. So if the Germans wanted to check on a Jewish man, all they had to do was to check if he was circumcised. With girls, he could pass. So in any case, that's what we had, illegal schools. Then we had a little hospital. We had no medication, but there were doctors and nurses that were trying to help people. We even made a Jewish theater to give people some more morale to survive. And in the schooling, by the way, the parents even wanted to have Hebrew school teachers. We had one Hebrew school teacher who went from one school to the other, was giving the children just Hebrew education as much as she could. We had no books, we had nothing. We had to improvise everything. Then there was this young group to which my little brother belonged. Those were boys and girls. The group was called Akiba. Akiba was a Zionist group. They were the runners for the underground in Krakow. And then the big ghettos, like ours was a little ghetto, we were just 15,000 people. But the big ghettos like Warsaw and Lodz, there the Germans were emptying the ghetto by sending people to the east. They used to say that they're taking people to work in the east. So, this wasn't, nobody minded to go to work. The only thing they started worrying was that nobody came back from the east, that they didn't get letters from there. What's happening there? They needed to know where they're going. So now those young runners, like my brother and his friends, were put on trains and sent by regular trains, followed the other trains to check where they were going. And they discovered Treblinka, Sobibor, Helno, and other death camps. And when they came back to the ghetto and told us that the Germans are making concentration camps where people are being gassed and burned, we didn't want to believe them. The Germans, the most cultured nation in the world, they're killing people by gassing and burning their bodies. We even had a man in our ghetto in Tomaszów. We had a man who told us that he escaped from a place called Treblinka, and he told us all about Treblinka. And we called him the crazy man from Treblinka because we didn't want to believe him either. Till one day, this was November now of during the time I got older, and by the time I was 19, I met a young man, and we fell in love, and we decided we're going to get married. We're going to get married, and this way we'll stick together, nobody can take us apart. We are family. And we did, we got married in November of 1942. Something happened, we were in my in-laws' house, and a shooting started around the ghetto. And when we heard the shooting, we knew that we had to be in our room, because whenever there was anything happening, you had to be in your place, raids or anything. And we ran through the streets of this ghetto, and the bullets were falling, and people were lying on the street dead. And I couldn't move, like you dream sometimes, you run and you cannot move. This is how he was practically pulling me. This was on a Friday night. Saturday morning, they decreed that the ghetto will be divided in half. As you heard, it was only 15,000 people. And the first part of the ghetto, let's see, the southern part of the ghetto, is to come to the marketplace, which was the selection area, and to go through a selection. And anybody who couldn't come, who was too sick, too feeble, too old, too young, was to be put on a chair in front of the building. Nothing alive was to be left in the building. Even some people maybe still had a cat or a dog, even those animals. They were Jewish dogs and Jewish cats. An assessment was dispatched, and he shot on the spot everybody who sat on those chairs. Everything was killed on the spot. They started on Saturday with one part of the ghetto, rested on Sunday, and Monday they took the second part of the ghetto. On Saturday I lost my parents and my older brother. On Monday I lost my in-laws, including my little Ruthie, who was my student in my school. There 750 of us were left. Of my family, only my little brother, myself, my husband, and his younger brother. We were the four left. At this point, my younger brother said to me, I don't believe that they have any intention of letting anybody live. I don't want to be killed here. I'm going to try to find the partisans in the forest, and I'm going to fight for my life. And he escaped, and never to be heard from again. I just hope that he got his wish, because there were different groups of partisans, not all of them were friendly to the Jews. And finally, those small camps became obsolete, and they put us on trains and they sent us to Auschwitz. And on arrival at Auschwitz, we knew already about concentration camps. We didn't even doubt it anymore. But still, to arrive at Auschwitz and to see it was such a horror, I cannot even believe that it really existed. And we had to jump off. First of all, those creatures in striped uniforms came up on the train and made us jump off the train. And on the platforms, we were immediately separated, men separate, women separately. Anybody under 12 and over 40, straight to the gas chambers. We were marched off to the camp proper. In our case, we were taken to Birkenau. Now, Auschwitz was very, very big. Auschwitz I, Auschwitz this, and Birkenau was the place where they had the crematoria and the gas chambers. And when we were marching to Birkenau, and I saw the chimneys, and the spewed just flames and ashes were flying, and you could feel them on your fingers. Those were human ashes, and I said to myself, I have to survive. I'm strong. I need to survive. The world has to find out about it. This cannot be forgotten. And this was working on my adrenaline. This is why I did survive. I went through so much later, but I did not give in. So we arrived. The first stop was a building about a room of this size where we were stripped, and we had to go to the next room where they shaved us. The next room was a disinfecting bath. And then they took us to a third room where they threw at us clothing. We got just dresses and shoes. We did not get underwear. We did not get any stockings or socks, nothing, just like that. When we came out of this building, it was evening, it was night. We didn't recognize each other without the hair and in those terrible rags that we were wearing. People were crying and milling around and just crying, not recognizing each other. And the SS women were beating us with whips to form a marching column of 5 abreast. And we came back, and I was watching, I was looking, I was memorizing. We came to the camp proper, and I discovered that it was divided into sub-camps. Camp A was the men, Camp B, or B2B, or the Czech camp, was the women, and this is where they put us. When we arrived, there was no room for us in Auschwitz. So they took the girls from the Czech camp and gassed them, so there was room for us. We got in the Czech camp. The only people from this Czech group that were left were the women that were in charge of the barracks and their helpers. The rest of the population was gone. Each camp, then there was Camp C, also women. Camp D was men. Then there was the gypsy camp. The gypsy camp, where when the gypsies arrived at Auschwitz, they were not subject to selection. They took them all, mothers, fathers, children, and everybody, into this gypsy camp. But later, in November of 1944, when the Hungarian influx came to Auschwitz, they needed room for them. So they gassed all the gypsies in one night. Elie Wiesel was one of them that was in the former gypsy camp. And then there was the twin camp, where Dr. Mengele kept twins for his experiments. He made horrible experiments of those twins. Most of the twins, if they survived, one survived, the other didn't, most of them. And then there was FKL, or Frauenkonzentrationslager, which was the beginning of the camp in Birkenau. This is A and B. Each camp was surrounded by a double electric barbed wire. At the entrance was a hut for the guard. When you came in, the camp was divided by a Lagerstraße or Camp Street. On both sides were barracks. Whenever you see pictures of Auschwitz, it looks so geometrically perfect. That's how it was. there were 15 barracks on this side, 15 on this. 1,000 people in each barrack. We had to sleep on shelves 8 abreast. We could not turn singularly because there was not enough room. We had to turn on command. On the second day after our arrival, they registered us. We had to stand by tables according to the letter of the alphabet, and there they had ledgers, big ledgers, and in those ledgers they put down our name and a number. And the number was then tattooed on our forearms on the spot. This was our things. Now Auschwitz was also not only Jewish, there were Christian people in Auschwitz. The Christians, of course, I don't know if gypsies were Christian or not, but there were Jehovah's Witnesses. There were political prisoners. There were criminals. All of us were marked by triangles. And our number was not only tattooed on our skin, but also sewn on a piece of rag on our clothing. And under that number was a triangle. The Jewish prisoner, we had a yellow triangle. Political prisoners had a red triangle. There were also German political prisoners, mind you. Criminals had black triangles, antisocialists green triangles, Jehovah's Witnesses purple triangles, homosexuals pink triangles. That's how we were marked. The only difference between them and us, they also were tattooed, they also had they were punished if somebody in a group, collective punishment for the groups. If somebody committed something against their rules, the whole group was punished. And the only thing, they were sentenced to Auschwitz, and the sentence was up, they were let go. We were brought to Auschwitz to die. We were not brought for any limited time. But at the end of 1944, when the Germans were losing the war, which we didn't know, we had no information whatsoever what was happening on the outside, plus we didn't think anymore in those terms. They came from the German industry to look for able-bodied people. And they came and we stood erect and we pinched our cheeks to look healthy. And I was very lucky to be chosen to work in a factory called Telefunken in Germany. Now Telefunken, my parents used to have a Telefunken radio. They used to manufacture radios before the war, and they still do now. But during the war, we manufactured airplane parts. And as a matter of fact, the Germans were so, well organized that we went through aptitude tests when we arrived at the factories. The only problem was, this was now winter, this was in November of 1944. Our shoes, most of us, we didn't have shoes, our shoes fell apart because we could not remove them for the night. They were always wet. If we would remove the shoes when we went to sleep in Auschwitz, they would have disintegrated. And they did disintegrate, but our feet would swell up so that we couldn't put them on in the morning. So that's why we just slept in wet shoes. And at the end, when we were leaving Auschwitz, we were given wooden shoes or wooden soles that were really strapped to our ankles with strings. And we were given coats, overcoats. But those overcoats, I never heard anybody remember that, but I do. They cut the sleeves off and mixed them up and sewed them on so we couldn't escape. We were this way, we were too visible. Also on the backs of our coats, they painted a red cross, like red. When we came to Reichenbach, by the way, which was on the Czech border, in that camp, they painted our backs with a white paint, this way, a regular cross. So there was no way of escaping. We had to walk kilometers, 6 kilometers to the factory. In the snow, the winter was absolutely a horror, that winter of 1944-45, very, very bad winter. And the shoes, the wood, the snow would gather under the wood. So we had to stop and kick off the snow to be able to continue walking. We were weak to begin with. I was so sick. I had malaria, dysentery. I was so very sick that if not the fact that I had the willpower to live, I wouldn't have. In January 1945, a group of men from Auschwitz arrived in our camp. They were the men at the death march that the Germans took out of Auschwitz because the Russians were coming close. They didn't want to leave any witnesses, and I think that they also wanted to protect themselves, because if they wouldn't have anything to do, they would have been sent to the Russian front. This way they were working. Still during when the Germans were losing the war, the priority was still killing of the Jews, not the war effort. Killing of the Jews was the priority. Trains were still taken to take people from all countries. We had people in Auschwitz from Greece, from Italy, from all over the world. They were still brought in where they needed trains for the German army. We were the priority. And this group of men from this death march arrived in our camp in Reichenbach. And one of those men knew me. And he told me that both my husband and his brother were killed on this death march. They perished. In February, our camp was liquidated, and we were put first on a march. We marched for 3 days over the mountains. They gave us each a loaf of bread at the outset. This was supposed to last for 3 days. We were so hungry, we just devoured it on the spot. For 3 days we had absolutely nothing to eat. After 3 days of marching, we were put on a train, cattle train. This time we were going to another factory, Telefunken, the same company in Westphalen, Porta Westfalica. You saw before a man came over to say hello to me. He was in Porta Westfalica as a Christian, as a Polish forced laborer, and he saw us being put on the trains there. He saw it. When he heard my story, he said, "I saw you girls." But of course he couldn't say anything because he had false papers. He was saving himself. It's also a story, you know. So in any case, we came there, and the factory was 7 stories into the mountains deep, with the elevator down, with all machinery. And this is when I really started losing faith. I said, how will the Allies know where to bomb a factory when it's deep in the mountains, covered with snow and vegetation? How can they ever find us? And we stayed there till March of 1945. It was Passover, I remember still. And they put us again on the cattle trains. Now the cattle trains, those were the box cars. They put us, they stuffed till there was no more room. Once there was no more room, they beat the last ones with whips. So they got a little more room. They stuffed more. As a result, we could not sit down. We could not move. When there was no more room, we had to stand, and some people just died standing up. And after 4 days, they stopped the trains. We had to jump off. They removed the dead bodies. On the way back in the train, onto the train, they gave us, like this, in our hand, a handful of raw elbow macaroni. They had no place to cook anymore. This was the first food after 4 days. Then we traveled again a few days, and we got a couple of raw potatoes. Then they put us on a field in Ludwigslust. Then they took us to a camp temporarily where they had salt mines, and people who had to work in the salt mines. But I was so sick that I was just in the barracks on my bed. And then finally, as you realize, I have to condense 6 years of my story. So I skip a lot and I just go through the basics. Finally, we arrived in Hamburg-Altona. You heard about Hamburg before. Hamburg is a very big industrial city in Germany, and Altona is a suburb of Hamburg, and they made a makeshift camp for us. And on arrival, I was chosen to work in the kitchen. And again, my attitude, I was always visible. And they took me there, and I was working in the kitchen, which was like winning the lottery, only I could hardly eat. I could not, but I was able to steal some food from the kitchen, from my barracks, from my friends. And when we worked 12-hour shifts, and my co-worker was a Yugoslav partisan girl, and this is what I remember. It seems like such a mundane thing, but I remember she had hair. She looked like a girl. We didn't. We came from Auschwitz. Our hair was starting to grow, but we didn't have hair. We didn't look like girls. Plus, she was not Jewish, so she wasn't treated the same way. One night, the camp commander came into the kitchen, and he said to us, there is a transport coming in. Transport in our lingo meant people on cattle trains. There's a transport coming in. They didn't eat for days. If you want them to have soup, you have to stay on and cook. And of course, we wouldn't refuse. So we stayed on, my Yugoslav friend and myself, and in came an SS woman. You know, the ones that I told you how horrible they were. She took out a pack of cigarettes and wanted to give us cigarettes. She had a smile on her face, and she said, you know, girls, whatever happened to you wasn't our fault. We didn't want you any harm. We just had to obey orders. And so sweet and so nice. And I looked at my Yugoslav friend, and she looked at me. What is she talking about? We understood the words, but we didn't know what she means by that. But one thing I got out of it, I got that she was approachable. And the thing that worried us the most was if they're going to let us, we knew something was happening, but if they're going to let us stay in this camp, or if they're going to put us again on the trains, which was just murder. So that's what I asked her. I said, are we going to stay here, or are we going on transports again? So she said, oh, no more transports. No, she said. And then she added, except the Jews. Boom. Then again, they didn't think I was Jewish. The next morning is roll call. Roll call, Jews on the left, non-Jews on the right. I had to stand roll call in the kitchen because that's where I worked. So I went on the left, and my Yugoslav girl was on the right, and she said to me, are you crazy? Come with me. They don't know that you are Jewish. Stay with me. And I said to her, you know something, a couple of weeks ago I might have taken you up on it. I cannot anymore. I'm finished. I'm going with my friends. Whatever will be, will be. And this saved my life. I later found out, but I didn't realize that at the moment. And we were traveling for a couple of days, and the trains were bombed, and the SS was jumping off the train and pointing their machine guns toward the train. Should we try to disperse, they would shoot us. That's how we were traveling, and after a couple of days, we finally wound up in Denmark. The name of the city was Padborg, Denmark. When we got there, the two SS men, they were always escorting those trains, put their knapsack on, and they said to me, now you are going to be free. What's going to happen to us, God only knows. And off they went. And there were Danish people who came to the train to pick up their relatives. And those were ladies and gentlemen in civilian clothing with coats and gloves, and hugging them and kissing them and taking them home. And I sat on the floor and I looked at that, and this is when it first hit me. Why did you even bother? You have no place to go, there's nobody waiting for you. This is when it first hit me that I had nobody and nothing. And I became paralyzed at this moment. From my waist down, I could not move. Beautiful, tall angels, I call them, approached the train. They put steps When they discovered that I couldn't move, they wanted to take a stretcher for me. But my friends wouldn't let me go because we knew where people on stretchers went. So my friends helped me down and supported me. I was standing on the platform, and this was the Swedish Red Cross, ladies from the Swedish Red Cross. Himmler made a deal with the Swedish Count Folke Bernadotte. They started with picking up Scandinavian prisoners from the camps, and then wound up, made a deal that some of the Jewish prisoners would be given passage to Sweden. And we came to Denmark. We stayed a couple of days in Denmark. Then they put us up. If you ever were in Scandinavia, then you know that there's a ferry boat between Copenhagen and Malmö. And they took us on those ferry boats and brought us over to Sweden. And in Sweden they put us on Pullman trains, regular trains, and it was the 5th of May of 1945. It was a nice day, the sun was shining. I sat on the bench on this train. The window was open, and a man peeked in and said, "Shalom." And we jumped. "Shalom? Are you Jewish? Are there Jews alive? Are there Jews walking on the street?" He says, "Oh, well, I'm the rabbi in this city." This was the rabbi who later married me. And we were absolutely beside ourselves, and there was a group of Polish Christian girls in the corner of the wagon. And one of them got up and came running to us. I'm Jewish, I just had false papers." So when she heard the word "Shalom," she just absolutely couldn't contain herself. Well, in any case, that's how we arrived in Sweden. We were in school buildings. The doctors told me that there is no medication for me. I was very fortunate that I was so sick because I couldn't eat. And this was saved my life. Very many of my friends were dying of eating in the beginning of our liberation in Sweden. They were just dying. The Red Cross didn't understand the extent of our malnutrition. They didn't know. Once I got better, once I was able to stand up, they put me on a scale, and I weighed 80 pounds. And this was after I already gained some weight, because I started gaining and I made myself another promise. Either I'm going to function and be able to take care of myself, or I'm just going to end it all. I just didn't see any reason for me living. I had family in America, I knew that, but America was so abstract and so far away. At this time, you didn't travel between Europe and America that much. So I started by standing by my bed and started moving. We were in school buildings, so my bed was by the wall, the other wall was a window. I was moving my legs with my hands, one leg at a time, till I got to the window. By the window I rested. Then I was going back to my bed. I looked out. One day when I stood by the window, I saw this big Swedish man on a bicycle. He came to the school building, looked up, pointed to me and said, come on down. And my heart stopped. Oh my God, he has news for me. And I ran down 2 flights of stairs without realizing it. When I came down, the man gave a package to the soldier, because there was Swedish soldiers around the school building, because we had so many illnesses with us that we could not communicate to the population. And he gave him the package, waved goodbye to me and left, and the soldier gave me the package. I went mesmerized back up 2 flights of stairs to my bedroom, sat down on my bed and opened the package. Those were chocolates. It was just a nice man who saw them. I cried like a baby. I gave away every bit of this chocolate. I didn't want it. I didn't realize at the time the big gift he gave me, I could walk. I just didn't want to have children, but after the miscarriage, I got, Mother Nature take over. I wanted a baby so badly. And my son was born. He was the prettiest baby in the world. And then 15 months later, my daughter also. And those two children gave me a reason for being. The only thing, I never spoke about the Holocaust. The reason for me surviving was to speak about the Holocaust. Not the Holocaust, we didn't know the word Holocaust at the time. This was the final solution of the Jewish question, that's what it was. But I couldn't talk, I didn't want to speak to my children because I was afraid that my children will learn to hate the people who did it to me. I don't want my children to grow up to be hateful. I want my children to be normal children. And not to tell them the whole story, I couldn't tell them anything. It took a very long time till my children heard anything, and never directly. The only time my children ever heard parts of my story, they never heard the whole story, is when they hear me speak to others. I cannot speak to my children about it. And when we started speaking, it was first really real. I spoke before that in New Jersey. I was invited to speak in a Hebrew school where the parents were very much against it, and they didn't want their children to be disturbed by such tragic things. So, but the principal was a wonderful lady, and she said, you just come and you just speak. The children had to have special permission from their parents. And when I came home after that, I was sick for 2 days. I was had to stay in bed for 2 days. It's just too much, too hard. And still, when I speak to children, there are certain things you heard that the children never do, because I cannot do that to them. First, when the deniers came and started speaking that the Holocaust never happened, this is when we decided that this has to be taken care of. How can they tell us? And also, in spite of everything, I'm a real optimist. I hope that there are more good in people than there is bad. And that I think that if I reach some young people and teach them that of course we are different, but we learn from one another's differences. The difference is wonderful. We cannot judge somebody because prejudice is prejudging. We cannot judge somebody because they're different from us. We are not better, neither are they. We have to learn to respect one another. You want to be respected, you have to give respect back. And this is so very important for me. When I speak to young people and I see in their eyes that they got it, that they get what I'm here to do. Because somebody said to me, do you want them to hate the Germans? I said, this is not my goal. I don't hate them. I know that there were Germans who were decent, so I gave you a little...
This is a 5-minute warning. We're going to break at 7 so that we have some time to visit the Mani Dido Learning Center and you have some time to move into the other room.
Do we have any questions?